I am beginning in 1 minute. I'm beginning. We are all fine. I'm just closing the window. Okay, beginning now. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear signatories and all participants. And thank you very much for joining us today. And a warm welcome to the webinar, Accelerate Your Company's WEPs Journey. The webinar is organized by the We Empower G7 program team. And We Empower G7 is funded by the European Union and implemented by the UN Women and the International Labour Organizations. I am Meral Guzel and from UN Women, and I am the Women's Empowerment and Principal Specialist. So I'm sure we became those last months very much expert in joining every platform on webinars, but just a quick reminder. If you have a question during the webinar, please enter it in the question panel for the organizers or the panelists to answer. And we will be happy to interact with you, and the presentations and will be followed by a very interactive, hopefully very interactive question and answer session. Please send us your questions so we can facilitate the discussions with our participants. And first, I would like to go over through our agenda. The opening remarks will be given by Anna Falth, and she is the We Empower G7 Program Manager and Head of Web Secretariat. And we have 3 panelists today, and all leading gender equality and women's empowerment work and in inspiring signatory institutions. And so we are very excited to explore with them today their concrete strategies and how WEPs has been changing their company culture. Burçak Inel is the Director of Financing the Economy of European Banking Federation. Márcia is the Global Head of Corporate Responsibility of RELX. And Tamara Dancheva is International Relations Manager of GSMA. So now I would like to invite Anna, and We Empower G7 Program Manager and Head of Web Secretariat, and for the opening remarks. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Meral. I will be very brief because we have 3 experts here with us today to talk about their specific WEPs journeys. I would just like to take the opportunity to welcome everyone, our web signatories and those that are thinking to become web signatories or those working for web signatory companies, to really hear from our panelists today on what their experiences have been. And this is the first in a series of webinars that we're organizing to really hear from our web signatories and hear what their achievements, their challenges, and recommendations to all of you, and what they suggest that you could be doing to really foster gender equality within your workplace, marketplace, and community. And we'll also hear from Meral a little bit about what we are up to at UN Women to really help facilitate these journeys. And we are open, as usual, for recommendations and suggestions from your side on what we can do things better. And we really hope to have a interactive and interesting conversation today with our 3 speakers. So I would just leave it over to you, Meral, to continue the webinar so we have as much time as possible for Tamara, Márcia, and Burçak.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much. So before we begin our fireside chat, and I would like to give you an overview of the WEPs and different ways of engagement. And Women's Empowerment Principles is a joint initiative of UN Women and UN Global Compact, and it was launched in 2010. And they provide guidance to businesses on how to advance gender equality and women's empowerment at the workplace, marketplace, and communities. So this webinar is mainly for our signatories, but considering we may have also curious prospect signatories, so the first way to engage with WEPs and of course to become a WEP signatory, you can see at different celebratory moments of our signatory globally. And please subscribe for our newsletter. Because the newsletter, you can receive continuous information from the WEP Secretariat and the WEPs community in large. And in our newsletter, we feature inspiring policies and practices of our signatories, but also we share different tools and resources that we produce here at the WEP Secretariat for the implementation of the principles. And watch out because the new edition is coming out today. The WEPs Journey. The WEP Secretariat worked on a full cycle of WEPs Journey for all our signatories. So this journey begins from the moment the company is interested to learn about WEPs and science, the WEPs. And we offer them different resources and tools to assist them at every stage of their journey. So just quickly going over them. And at the sign stage, when the company signs the WEPs, they get, of course, engaged with us, either with the HQ, here is the headquarters office, or country offices, and we do welcome you. And right after the company joins the community, they will receive a full welcome package, and which is consisted of different assets, and the assets needed for their internal and external communication. And they are also invited to create their own company profile page at weps.org. Then at the action phase, the company began develop their gender action plan, and they start implementing. At the third stage, we are very much interested in capturing the experience of the signatory. So we do this through the development of case studies or interviews or stories. Then it comes engaged phase. So it's the moment the signatory wants to, I would say, export their good policies and practices and be a voice for WEPs. So they actively activate their networks. So it can be vendors, suppliers, business partners, affiliates, and they activate them to support and sign for the implementation of the WEPs. And then as we have, and then the reporting phase that we are working, and it is coming very soon. So as we have limited time to go over all those resources, and we will do this in the next webinars covering by pieces. So today we would like to introduce you only 3 of them that will increase your engagement directly. The first one is the company profile page on weps.org. The second one are the code cards, and the last one are gender action plans. So company profile, that as you can see, can be created. It's just right after the signatory receives the confirmation. So a guidance note is sent to you. So on the left of the screen, you can see a guidance note. It's a very detailed guidance note composed of mainly step-by-step screenshots to assist the company to create this page. So this company, and on the right side, you can see how it translates on the weps.org. So your company page is a great way to communicate your commitment to gender equality and women's empowerment, and it gives high visibility to your actions as well. So as I just picked up a few on the company profile page. We have the general information on the company and their actions. But on the left side, you can see the quote of their CEO, and here are the few quotes of different sectors from different sizes and continents. So as I mentioned before, when the company signs, they receive a full package of communication assets within the welcome package, is what we call the welcome package. And this welcome package includes key messages on gender equality and women's empowerment, internal communication template and press release templates, many promotional materials, use of logo policy, etc. So it is a huge big package. It can be like the subject of one full webinar. But I will only mention here one of the assets, and which is the code cards. So those cards can be created through the templates. It's very easy, and it is a great and efficient way of communicating your commitment and support of the WEPs. The next stage will be the building of gender action plan, and without plan there is no action. And we do, as the Secretariat, we want to know about your plans. We want to know about your actions and your results on the WEPs, on the implementation of the principles. And also we should say that there is no one way of implementing the principles. And there are as many ways as the number of companies in the world, because each company implements the principles depending on their geographical location, sector size, and a lot depending, I would say, on the leadership. But we want to collect your experiences during the implementation of the principles. And we want to know about your journey. We want to know about your lessons learned. So our aim is to share it and with our big WEPs community, just with the hope that this will benefit others. So gender action plan templates that you see here is a very simple way to capture this. So when we receive your plan, and we can either do interviews with them and or do a case study. All interviews are published at empowerwomen.org at the moment, and soon at weps.org. And the case studies, so signatories have, of course, several course of actions on different areas, and again, depending on their context. So when we see a company really deep diving on one specific area, for example, closing the gender pay gap, or establishing mentoring program, establish and practice gender responsive procurement, etc., etc. So, but with concrete results. So we try to engage more with the signatory and develop the case studies with them. So you can today find all finalized case studies on weps.org/resources. And we believe they are a great resources to learn and from each other. Now I'm introducing again back Anna, who will be the moderator today, and we can begin our fireside chat. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Meral. And if there are any questions related to Meral's presentation, we can also take it in the Q&A part later on. But I would like to welcome our three panelists, Burçak, Márcia, and Tamara. And they're representing three very committed organizations that we have brought to speak a little bit about their experiences and journeys with the women's empowerment principles. And since we heard from Meral, it starts with the signing. Maybe we could take a round to hear from all of you. How did the signature come about for you? What were some of the maybe roadblocks that you have some tricks on overcoming that could be helpful for those that are looking to sign the women's empowerment principles, but also a little bit on what difference did it make for your organization? So maybe we can start with Tamara and to hear from you, and then we'll go to Márcia and Burçak.
Thank you, Anna, for this lovely introduction, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. This is indeed an important topic for GSMA, and one that we are very much committed to. I think it's not a secret that our Director General, Mats Granryd, is a real advocate for women's empowerment and, of course, for gender equality at the workforce. So really the push, if you wish, came from the top. And actually, Mats led GSMA to become the first sector to commit to the UN Sustainable Development Goals back in 2016. So for GSMA, commitment to the UN Women Empowerment Principles is actually very much a part of our larger commitment to the SDGs. And so, of course, this was a natural next step for us and for the company. And as such, I think this has really helped accelerate the entire journey and the entire process. Now, I don't think, of course, a commitment from the top is necessarily the key success factor, but I do think that it does make a difference. And of course, it makes for a much easier journey. And it, especially when you look into how that's communicated internally across the entire company, because of course, it's a commitment that comes from the top and from leadership, but it does need to trickle down throughout the entire company culture. And I think in GSMA's case, the fact that we were already leading on a number of other commitments, and of course we have a very strong commitment to advancing gender equality in the digital space, certainly formed a part of this journey. And I have to say, one of the things which perhaps, not necessarily as a challenge, but a roadblock that I can see could be, of course, a significant factor for companies in general is data, right? Because when we were completing our company profile on the WEPs website, we had to provide a number of key data around number of women on our board, number of female employees in the company, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in the case of GSMA, we had this data because we do report on the gender pay gap. But I can see how this can be an issue if companies are not reporting or don't have such data handy, because ultimately, if you don't, measure, if you don't monitor, you don't know what your challenges are. So I would say this is really key and definitely an area where companies need to pay attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamara, for telling a little bit the story of GSMA. And yes, we know MAPS is championing the WEPs and gender equality. So thanks for that. And data is certainly a challenge. What we have tried to do with the sign-on, just for clarification, for our prospective signatories, in the form, we are giving quite large ranges, but we want each company to start thinking about it. So it is not to be scientifically correct at the sign of signing, but at least have a sense of where ballpark are you with the percentage of women in the company, etc. So thank you so much. Márcia, over to you and hear a little bit about how you the WEPs came about for you in RELX. Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, we cannot hear you. Maybe we can start with Burçak, and then you could see if you could see if there's something with your sound settings. So we'll listen to Burçak in the meantime.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. European Banking Federation, company of 35 people representing 3,500 banks. We thought of signing. We found out about the WEPs basically through a combination of coincidence and I would say predestination. It was meant to be. Coincidence because exactly last year, International Women's Day, I was invited to an event organized by the Professional Women's International Brussels chapter, and the organizer had kindly sat me next to the Brussels representative of UN Women, Dagmar Schumacher, and she gave a speech about WEPs, and listening to her, somehow something clicked in my brain. And it just so happens that the day before, I had gone to an event organized by the European Investment Bank, where I had sat through a whole day of women talking about how difficult it was for them to raise finance for extremely good ideas they had had as entrepreneurs, because somehow the financial system had not been supportive of their ideas. So these things somehow like came to the surface, like boiling, you know, and I just thought, yeah, why not? We can do this. But of course, like other things in life, there's a background to this. And the background is that the part of the EBF where I'm working, in fact, our job description, our purpose is to help the banks do a better job of financing the economy in the fullest sense. So the gender issues had been on our mind from the beginning, but we hadn't done anything about it until that moment. And so the dinner and introduction to WEPs as an idea was the push that we needed. Also, just a couple of months prior, we had signed Principles for Responsible Banking, which is another UN-related initiative, and that committed us to all the SDGs and SDG 5 included. So, of course, a big enabler was that my CEO, whom I know very well, is a feminist, and not just by word, but by action. I'm myself a feminist. My mother is a feminist. I come from a country that has 100 years of progress for women, has been backsliding recently, but in Turkey, there's 100 years of history of women being in society and economy and government. In a way, when I think of all this, I really wonder why it even took us this long to sign the WEPs, because it was an idea that was waiting. Enablers. I think the business case for diversity in general and gender diversity specifically for business and for the financial sector is very well made. So that's one thing. You don't need to convince anyone why you're doing this as a banking association or as a bank, because it's good for business. That's a very big enabler. And as an industry body, for a long time now, we have noticed that the sector that we're representing is not as diverse as the industry associations themselves. So we are actually being kind of intending to handle that. Also, a lot of our member associations and a lot of banks have now been spending decades working on this topic. So that was a very big enabler. I met many of their diversity chiefs. And finally, I should say, WEPs as a framework is the big enabler, because it's a very adaptable tool and it helps you focus. Frankly, if it hadn't been for WEPs, what was last year for me, just that, just moment, that click, would have just remained as a passing sentiment, and it would not have turned into action. And how we're doing this very quickly towards, and then I'll stop here. We have established a team, so a team within a team, and our chief operations officer himself has experience having done a diversity a project for a big international company. And so our approach is not just to write something like a set of rules and procedures, which we will then impose on others, but to design it as a movement, like not as a ship, but as a wave that will lift other people and that will bring people together. So I think I'll be able to talk about that later, but I don't want to exceed my 2-3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really like that, the movement that lifts other people. And we know also it's part of the framework of the Women's Empowerment Principles to also consult. The 6th principle is about consulting women and girls in local communities. And it's important that they also know. And that is also a way for companies to build a pipeline of talent for the future, to really be engaged with the local community. So I like that movement to lift other people. Thanks for that, Burçak. Márcia, can we check if your sound works?
Yes, working fine now.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. So over to you.
Okay, well, I'm Márcia Balisciano. I'm Global Head of Corporate Responsibility at RELX. RELX is the world's knowledge company. We have about 33,000 employees in 40 countries around the world. And our entry point was from the UN Global Compact, to which RELX is a signatory. So we heard about it and thought about it, decided to dig in and find out a little bit more about this new initiative when it was launched, the WEPs. And then we had to do some internal soul winning. We had to marshal the arguments. We had to say to our leadership and ultimately to our CEO that the WEPs were aligned with our own aspirations and that they were about raising our ambition and that they could help us to do that by showing us best practice. And I wanted to highlight one of the ways in particular that it has been so good for us in terms of that best practice. There is the WEPs tool, and that is free for you to see how you can judge what you're doing today and how that aligns with the 7 WEPs principles. And so we keep going back to that, keep looking at what we are doing and how our activity is matched up with the 7 principles. So we found it an incredibly useful way of trying to chart good practice in our own organization to be involved with the WEPs and to learn from others, including today from my 2 colleagues on the panel.
Great, thank you so much, Márcia. And indeed, the WEPs gap analysis tool, as we call it, is a great tool to assess where you stand and what remains to be done. So you have all talked about actions, and Meral was saying no action without a plan. So can you talk a little bit about your the action plans that you put in place, and maybe Burçak also a little bit about the team and how that team came about and how that have helped you with your action plan. So maybe we'll start again with Tamara.
Thank you so much, Anna. Indeed, I think it's important to translate commitments into action. And again, I have to say that for GSMA, the entire WEPs journey was very informative up until now, because it's been only a year since we joined, and it has really been able to feed across both our HR practices internally, but also in external commitments. So let me give you a few examples, at least on where we stand now. And of course, it is a continuous journey. So I think it's important to remember that, these are actions that are still very much work in progress. As of last year, and actually very shortly after we signed the WEPs, GSMA instituted an employee-led diversity and inclusivity forum called One GSMA, which essentially brings employees together. And of course, the idea is to, on the one hand, educate around the importance of diversity and inclusivity as part of the workforce, and of course, as part of the work culture, but also have a way to monitor, of course, some of the challenges, and subsequently devise action plans by employees that, of course, can be utilized to resolve some of these challenges. Now, the strength of this forum, apart from the fact that it's employee-led, is that it's actually sponsored by the GSMA leadership. So it creates a really nice cycle, because ultimately the message doesn't come just from the top, it's driven also from the bottom. And I think this is really important, because it's not seen as something that's, let's say, imposed as part of our commitment to the WEPs or overall commitment on the part of GSMA. And as part of this forum, we have 2 particular networks that focus particularly on gender-based inclusivity in the workplace. One is our Women in Tech network, which aims to essentially look into assisting both our HR teams, but also individual colleagues on their career journey and path, in terms of how can they transition from their current positions into leadership positions respectively, but also across the tech industry, because it's not a secret that it is our industry. And I should have, of course, clarified at the beginning that GSMA represents the global mobile industry. So we have over 400 mobile operators, and of course, also extended members in the mobile ecosystem. So the industry as such is very male dominated. And so again, the idea of the network is to devise best practice that can be used not just, of course, inside GSMA, but also across the industry, and of course, across our mobile network operators. And we also have an intersectional feminist network, which of course acknowledges additionally that you may face a challenge depending on your identity. And it's not as simple as, of course, as a woman, naturally, you face certain challenges, but depending on your race, depending on your sexual orientation, depending on whether or not you have a disability, you may face an additional challenge. And that's an important recognition. And so the 2 networks work hand in hand, of course, around some of these issues. And I'm actually happy to announce that as a next step, we are looking to develop a best practice guide, which of course will serve to issue some recommendations around practices that can be implemented internally to support not just the recruitment of female talent across GSMA, but also retention. So this is, let's say, when it comes to some of our internal commitments and how we have proceeded, of course, to engage our employees on the WEPs journey. And when it comes to, I think, let's say, engaging our members as part of our action plan, of course, public, let's say, commitment and advocacy on the part of the WEPs is also an important part. And if you allow me, I'll give you another example, and I'll stop there, cautious of time. So on the one hand, you know, GSMA is leading, as I mentioned, on a lot of these issues, and this year we are chairing the Equals Global Partnership for Digital Gender Equality. And this, of course, allows us to advocate for the WEPs in the framework of that partnership. And on the other hand, our Director General is co-chair of the B Teams working group on gender diversity at the workforce, where equally we are able to, of course, enforce, or let's say communicate the importance of the principles. And as a matter of fact, the principles served as a basis to form the BT's equality principles. Now, for those of you who haven't heard of the B Team, this is a nonprofit initiative led by Sir Richard Branson that brings together global leaders from across private sector, but also businesses around responsible business practices. So I think, you know, this kind of gives you an example of how we are able to communicate our commitment both, you know, externally, but also internally. And I'll stop here because I have a few other examples, but I'm happy to share a bit later in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, you're emphasizing the fact that you need to seek buy-in for a smooth implementation journey. So having employee-led, it's very important, and make sure that it's not only top-down but also bottom-up, and that the suggestions for how to improve the culture, the workplace, etc., comes from the employees themselves. And so, Márcia, I'd like to hear also from you in terms of setting up an action plan and how you're going about it.
Thank you. I would like to say that we are concentrating our efforts in 3 areas. We need to have our own house in order in terms of what we do as a company. We need to be advancing what we call our unique contributions as a business. So we've thought long and hard about what separates RELX from other companies in our sector and other companies more generally in terms of the contribution that we can make to society. And among those ways are promoting universal sustainable access to information, promoting science and health, protection of society, furthering the rule of law and access to justice, and fostering communities, which map to our 4 business segments. And then the third area is really about being an advocate and having ideas and plans there. If I give you 2 examples in terms of having our own house in order. When I started with the company over 15 years ago, I'm the founding head of corporate responsibility, there were no women on our board. Today, thanks to the commitment of our chair, Anthony Habgood, women comprise 36% of our board and 44% of our non-executives on the board. So that is some movement. And internally, we also know that if, like they say, if you don't measure, you don't advance. And so we need to make sure that we set some inclusion goals. And if any of our listeners go to the RELX Corporate Responsibility Report on relx.com, they'll see that one of those goals for 2020 is setting inclusion goals, and they will encompass gender as well as other aspects of inclusion. So that's kind of a next step. We need to be transparent about what we are trying to achieve as we continue to raise the number of women in our organization, because we're over 50% women in our company. And then when you look at anyone who manages someone, then women are still a high percentage, but not as much as men. And when you get to senior operational managers, we're about 30%, but we know we can do better. In terms of our unique contributions, Elsevier has, one of our science business, has a lot of experts. And one of the ways that we are trying to support women in Africa is through a Water First leadership program, because women scientists in that field are not as highly known necessarily as their male counterparts. So we've been running a program in a number of different countries, and over the next 3 years, COVID-19 notwithstanding, we hope that over 100 African women water scientists will benefit from this program. And then the third area that I mentioned, which is advocacy, here we need to use our voice, we need to use our convening power to try and move the agenda forward. we released our third gender report on women in science and women in research in March of this year. And it's a free report which can be found on the free portal, the RELX SDG Resource Center. And it's called the Researcher Journey Through a Gender Landscape. And here, I think I find it positive that women are gaining an increasing share of the output in all fields of research, but men still outnumber women, and they still publish more, and they still publish more internationally. So we still have work to do, and we need to be trying to do our part in this sector to make a difference.
Thank you so much, and thanks also for bringing up the element of transparency and also showcasing your figures, which is very, very much similar in most companies, that the higher you get, there are fewer the women there are. And this is also part of what we are trying to accomplish with the framework of the Women's Empowerment Principles. And you have both talked about the inclusion, and I also see some of the questions coming in. The WEPs framework is focusing on women broadly, but of course it's a very inclusive framework that takes what also Tamara talked about earlier, some of the intersectionalities of race, age, sexual orientation, etc. So I might have said engaging women and girls in local communities. Of course, I meant the broader community with all of its dimensions from an intersectional lens. So just responding to that as we talk about this. And I would also like, if Márcia, if you'd like to share the report with Meral, and then we can, when we share the recording later, we can add that link to it. And also Burçak and Tamara, if you have other links that you'd like to add, we can also share them at that point. So Burçak, you also have a lot to share, so over to you. You're still muted.
Yes, I just want to say thanks for all the experiences that you've shared with us, because I feel like I'm already learning. So the way that we're implementing WEPs is to achieve a cascade effect, because as I said, we're an industry body that represents 32 national banking associations, which ultimately represent 3,500 banks. So although we signed only for ourselves, as a company employing 35 people in Brussels mostly, and also in Frankfurt, our intention is to help ultimately these 3,500 banks to also either sign the WEPs or to accelerate work that they have already undertaken, they may have undertaken in the same spirit. So with that in mind, we've adapted the 7 principles. I mean, we've clustered them essentially into 4 work streams. So the content is the same, but it's adapted to the kind of business that we're doing. And concretely, that means first and foremost, a work stream around ourselves as an employer of men and women, what Márcia referred to as getting your own house in order. And I think that's definitely the same principle for us. We want to be the best employer that we can be for men and women. And that involves looking at HR, pay gap, training, and all the issues that come with that. We also look at ourselves as a trade association, and that means we aim to improve the inclusiveness of the input that we get from the sector that we represent, the inclusiveness of the issues that we look at, and also how we represent that at the EU level. And that means looking at things like the ratio of women in our working groups, committees, women as chairs, and also how many women we have at a typical event we organize. And then a separate cluster will be around encouraging banks and banking associations to adopt WEPs and to help them to implement these policies. And finally, something that we will probably only start next year will be access to finance. And that really represents, the core business that we're in. Now, how we're going about it, we have a team. It's a mixed team, mixed in terms of gender. disciplines, HR, Chief Operations Officer, of course, myself, looking at financing the economy, other colleagues, mixed in terms of also perspectives. For instance, we have one team member who came into this actually with a lot of skepticism, which we thought was very healthy, because she thought that maybe we were not emphasizing race enough, other elements of diversity. So we accept that respectfully. And this team is helping with also quick wins and also more in-depth study. For instance, we did a point zero analysis looking at different elements of the EBF. And, I couldn't have done this myself. And, we all took a part of that. And also we are right now preparing conversations in all the different teams within the EBF, which will be, each of which will be facilitated by a member of this team. And the discussions will be about unconscious bias based on a Harvard study. And this will be facilitated by each team member. And that means that we're already branching into the full EBF team. I can talk about other aspects, but maybe in the final round. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Burçak. And all of you have, in some way or another, talked a little bit about how you are aligning with the WEPs with either your members. From Burçak and Tamara, you talked a little bit about the B team, but it's also important to engage them in the supply chain. So as vendors, suppliers, business partners, etc. So maybe we can hear some reflections or what you have been doing so far to engage and really help us create that gender equality and gender responsive ecosystem. Tamara, I'll start with you again, if you don't mind.
Sure. No, thank you. Thank you so much, Anna. And actually, this is a really good time to give you another example, which for me at least was particularly interesting. And again, I think one thing I should mention, I think very often we focus on, as companies, on what we don't do, and we actually don't take enough credit for what we do. So I just think, as a positive note, I do think that the WEPs Journey also is a wonderful exercise in terms of looking across the company and really kind of flashing out to the surface actually how much you do. And so in the GSMA's case, particularly when it comes to engaging our membership, but also the broader mobile ecosystem, we have, for the past 2 years, I should say, we have developed a sustainability assessment framework to better understand the landscape of mobile operators' efforts in both social, but also environmental sustainability. And the framework, which was designed in collaboration with Yale University, is intended to examine sustainability efforts across the mobile industry as such, but in a comparable way so that, of course, we can extract best practice. Now, the interesting thing is that the framework doesn't only assess the performance of the mobile operators themselves, but also the interaction of the company with society and subsequently the leadership positions adopted on global challenges and opportunities. And so the recent adoption of the empowerment principles by GSMA has really served to inform the framework, particularly on the issue of employee diversity, which is, of course, one of the criteria, if you wish, that the framework looks into. And so moving forward, this framework will be enriched with additional indicators on the issue of employee diversity as per the WEPs Action Areas framework. And here in particular, Principle 1 on high-level corporate leadership, and of course, Principle 7 on measuring and reporting. And so I think moving forward, this will not only allow for an improved socioeconomic impact assessment around the issue of employee diversity for the mobile sector, but I genuinely think this can also serve to provide best practice for the entire WEPs community. And actually, this is something that, again, kind of reflecting on our journey for the past year, has really proven to be the most added value. Really engaging with the WEPs community and learning from other companies and signatories in terms of what has worked and what hasn't. So I think, at least for me, this is really one example that kind of sticks out and again, really exciting to see how, of course, the reporting continues moving forward and what the results will be. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And we have a lot of questions coming in, so I'd like to also move over to Márcia to talk about some engagement with other business partners, and then Burçak, and then there are some specific questions for you also, Burçak, to respond to. So maybe we can take that one before you answer my question. Márcia?
Hi, yes. Well, I just wanted to say that there's, something that we are considering is the picture within gender. We need to look, in our case, we have about 9,000 technologists in our business, but how many of them are women? So, and what are we going to do about the challenges that we find? Because one of the things that we also have been working on is indeed having the data to show us what that picture actually is. And that's an ongoing effort to make sure that it's robust and that we are reflecting on it on not just an annual basis, but on a quarterly basis, and that data is shared with our senior leadership. But I also wanted to flag that in the time in which we are experiencing now, we also need to look at the journey for Black women in our organization, particularly in light of Black Lives Matter, because this is another aspect. And one of the ways that we can try and help our own employees and improve our performance is by the development of our employee resource groups. So a few years back, for example, within Elsevier, we had just 5 women who were part of an employee resource group, and now we have 13 active chapters around the world. And so, long may that continue, and can we increase that? I also just wanted to say another word about the importance of companies being aware of what's happening in their supply chain. And I think this really aligns well with Principle 5 of the WEPs to implement enterprise development, supply chain, and marketing practices, because it's an ongoing effort. The United States is our largest market, and we have been really focusing on supplier diversity. And on a rolling 4 quarters basis from 2014 to 2020, we've increased our spend with women-owned businesses by 75%. But as a total of our overall spend, again, there's more that we can do. So that's good, but we can't be complacent, and we need to continue to raise the bar higher.
Thank you so much. So some of the questions that we have received, and I thought, Burçak, maybe they cover some of the things that link to my question, was around, hang on, if you could give more details about UBT discussions and conversations in all levels of the company. Did they do workshops with all the employees? That's from Güneş. Sorry for not sure exactly how to pronounce that. I think it's also a Turkish name, so you know better. But there's also, if there's a data sheet or resource that really shows how inclusion of women has helped the banking sector. So basically, like if there's some business case that has been written up for the banking sector that proves that more women actually helps the industry. So if you could maybe incorporate those into your answer about how you're also engaging in the broader ecosystem.
Okay, happy to. Last year, when we launched the whole process, we organized a dinner for this, and on the occasion of that dinner, when we were preparing the speech, I did a lot of research on this, and in fact, all the things that I read, the one that I liked the best was an IMF report, so maybe I can provide that link to you. But there's actually a lot of material. I mentioned the IMF because I think it was actually published last year as well, so it was very comprehensive, and it looked at the impact of gender diversity in all areas of finance, including the supervisory agencies as well. And so based on that, we have been quoting basically both the benefits and also where we are. So, for instance, where we are across the world, there are only 2% of banks that have women CEOs. Of the unbanked, almost 2 billion unbanked adults in the world, 56% are women. And the wealth gap is actually 40%. That's a very important number. The wealth gap as a result of not only the income gap, but also other factors in the way pension systems are built. But the benefits are also really important, and I took a couple of them here. I mean, for ethnic diversity, for instance, so not gender, but companies in the top 25% ethnic diversity are a third more likely to be more profitable, and actually similar, even bigger numbers. I mean, better numbers for banking sector. For me, the main argument that has stuck is actually the 2008 crisis, because there was a lot of, you'll remember, it was after that there were a lot of studies that looked at the impact of diversity on good judgment in the boards, and and how that translates into the financial sector. And it's not just banks, it's not just investment banks either, but it's really every part of the system. And there are some studies that show, for instance, that even a bank credit assessor is more likely to approve the credit for a woman, who's applying for a loan, or an investment fund that is owned by women is definitely more likely to approve the venture capital investment in a woman's project than one dominated by men. I mean, there are lots of explanations for this, but it all confirms the same point, that the more diversity we have in finance, the more diversity we will have in business, and the more diversity we have in business, the more profitable and stable our economies will be, or sustainable our economies will be. I think I already used up a lot of minutes for this, but maybe I can say a few very brief points about how we're involving the members, if I may. And okay, or have I run out of time? Okay, very quickly, we are doing interviews actually right now with the members. So because one thing is numbers that you have or studies that you have read, but another thing is to talk to people and to understand where the discussion is in their own countries. Because we're a pan-European organization, we are faced with a very heterogeneous situation. Our banks are from all different countries, and they all face different situations in terms of where women are in their economies. Things like work-life balance, childcare, all these things are different across European countries. But also banks are in different places as well. Some are actually very advanced. Some would like to be, but they haven't had the chance to do that. So we're designing a very adaptable project that will embrace all these different situations, and that will hopefully offer cooperation with different kinds of banks and associations. And the ultimate goal will be to encourage more to adopt WEPs in their own way, and to exchange best practice so that they can learn from one another, and so that banks in particular, in the way they implement WEPs, they don't only look at themselves as employers, which is very important, but that they also look at how they are financiers in the economy, how they are financing women and providing access to women. And that will really ultimately create the cascade effect that we want. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You covered all the three pillars of the WEPs there, with the workplace and the marketplace and community. So thank you. Some of the questions, Márcia, you already touched upon it a little bit earlier about Black women. There's a question also on how we incorporate women of color into a feminist agenda. And I can say from our side, from the WEPs Secretariat, we're also working on some different action cards that are looking at what are the top 5 actions on equal pay, on women on board, and we will also have one specifically on anti-racism and non-discrimination. So that are some concrete recommendations that we will share as part of our upcoming campaign. We commit that will have a series of calls to action included. So that's one of the questions that maybe you could tackle. Márcia, you already talked a little bit about it, but maybe you also would like to add something additionally. And Fernanda from Grupo Bimbo in Mexico is also asking Márcia, actually, how has the WEPs helped you, your company, to achieve the inclusion goals that you mentioned, women in leadership? And then we also have a very interesting questions which we have tackled in a previous webinar, which is about the increased domestic violence during the COVID-19 crisis. And we actually have a specific recommendations on weps.org/resources. But if any one of you would like to tackle some of the increased domestic violence in your respective companies and countries, etc., maybe you could mention something about that. And we have very little time left. So I think, let me just see if I received any other comment, but I think, yeah, I think that's it. Just how can we learn about successful and creative community initiatives and advocacy examples? So this is something that we also got a question from one of the participants who wanted to know a little bit more about the capture phase. So Tamara, you had one piece from Matt on GSMA's work, and Márcia, you also have a case study. So maybe there's something you'd like to add to that as well. And then we'll very briefly, and then we'll have a poll, and then we'll close. So maybe we take the other order this time. Burçak, you can start.
Sorry, which question are you assigning to me? Because there was quite a lot.
Whatever questions you felt that you'd like to, if it's about women of color, domestic violence, any of those questions that you'd like to tackle, since we have very limited time.
I spoke a lot before, so I mean, the question about race, I think, I mean, basically, our current idea is not to draw a general diversity strategy to draw up, and but to focus on WEPs now. We think that because we're doing WEPs in such a way that it influences our culture, it eventually will have a knock-on effect on other aspects of diversity. So that's our current approach. I mean, otherwise, it's very much also on our mind, because race is a very important prism through which people are discriminated against, and especially in Europe, I mean, in business, we don't have enough racial diversity. That's all on my side.
Thank you. Márcia?
Yes, well, on the question of promoting more Black women within our organization, I think it's a combination of listening, learning, and then ultimately doing. So in our case, we have an African ancestry network chapters in the US, and we have been meeting with them and engaging our senior leadership so that we can hear about if we're going to be better at race, how do we do that? And there's a lot of learning that's going to come out of those discussions. That's not to say that we haven't been doing lots of things in previous years, but I think, again, this is a moment that I hope will really help to propel so many companies forward in terms of what they are doing for their Black employees across the board, and also for thinking about what this means in other contexts. So, for example, we are a UK headquartered company, and Black, Asian, and multi-ethnic employees are an important area of focus for us. And so I think watch this space, and I hope that I'll have more to say as we get further on into the year in terms of what our approach will be. And ultimately, I think the aspiration will be to come up with some specific goals particularly on race and ethnicity, which is going beyond just understanding what our numbers are. But I also wanted to just address the question that was raised about, what's the benefit and, to being involved with the WEPs. And I think, again, coming back to, we all need a moral compass. And on gender, I think the WEPs provide that. And you continue to, I was talking about before, raising the bar. And as you raise the bar, it helps us to continue to, chart a higher path. But I wanted to specifically point out that for companies, we are increasingly being scrutinized for our ESG performance, environmental, social, and governance. And the better that we do in terms of how we perform on gender will only help to increase our performance when we are being assessed against not only our profitability or about the excellence of our products and services, but in terms of the long-term sustainability. And being a company that is reflective of our customers, of our communities, is absolutely essential. And we know that women are a part of that.
Great. Tamara, any final words in response to these questions?
Thank you. I mean, just to add to what the colleagues have said already, I think I cannot emphasize enough the importance of unconscious bias training. This is something that GSMA tried out, which was really successful, because ultimately, unless you address, of course, that aspect, it's very difficult to also understand really what the perceptions are and how you can tackle subsequently challenges that arise, because very often it's not conscious, right? So and I took part of the training, and I can I can really vouch that this is a necessary step alongside everything else. And just to say, absolutely, monitoring is key. Measuring progress, but also ensuring that gender doesn't remain a silo, right? Gender diversity and inclusivity needs to be, intertwined in, throughout all HR processes, not just, in gender pay gap reporting, but also salary reviews, hiring practices, retention practices, promotion practices. So it's not, let's say, a one-off, in one area that leads to change. And so, ultimately it needs to become part of the company culture. And that goes with diversity and inclusivity in general, of course, not just with gender diversity. So again, I think, if I can make an appeal on behalf of GSMA, I cannot encourage signing up the WEPs more, because it's really a unique instrument which can guide and assist your companies as you try, of course, and achieve gender balanced workforce. So I highly, encourage those of us here today that are considering to definitely step up and take that step. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I would just like to take the opportunity as we launch the poll to also say to all the participants that have contributed questions and comments that we will look at them carefully afterwards and see how we can respond to them in the most effective way. I see that there's one participant that'd like to connect with you separately, Burçak, on some discussion. So we will help facilitate the answers to that after the webinar, since we are already over time. So if you could respond to the poll. The first question is, how informed are you with the WEPs and the WEPs journey after this webinar? We'll take a few seconds to let you respond. Thank you very much. Great. Many people are well informed. Of course, it's not something that we can respond to very quickly, and it's an ongoing series of webinars. So thank you to our panelists today that have helped shed some light, and we will, of course, organize more webinars to continue with this with these sessions. And basically everyone benefited from the event. So thank you so much to our wonderful panelists, and thanks for your time and for your insights. We have one final question. How satisfied are you with the information received? Excellent. So we have some very satisfied and satisfied people, almost making up the 100%. So thank you very much again. And I would also like to take the opportunity to thank the European Union for supporting us and allowing us to drive the WEPs journey forward with all companies from all over the world. Thank you very much. And we'll be back soon with the next webinar to shed some more light on how to engage with WEPs. And we will also respond to the questions that were left unanswered. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.